Has everyone got a seat? Hello. Is this, oh, hello. Okay. Is this thing on? Start practicing my type 5 for the comedy cellar. No, I'm kidding. Hello, in case you don't know me, I'm Zoe Brester-Pennings. I am the current artist in residence here at UW-Parkside, and you're at my artist talk. So, in case you haven't seen the work that I'm going to talk about, there will be a reception tomorrow, the 22nd, from 4 to 6 p.m. So I would love to see you there, but for now, I would love to start this talk. So, like I mentioned, I am the current printmaking artist in residence here at UW-Parkside, and first off, I'd like to start off by thanking you all for this amazing opportunity. This residency has truly been a transformative experience, and it would not be possible without the support of the school, the faculty, the students, and the Osborne Skekik Family Foundation and the Ram Wisdom Art Museum. I am so grateful to be here working in the print shop, helping students, and creating in a new body of work, culminating in my new show, Horseplay, which is down in the Foundation's gallery, reception tomorrow from 4 to 6. So I say that I'm a printmaker, but my work is actually what I would consider interdisciplinary. So despite being a printmaker, I make all sorts of things. So I make sculptures, videos, performance, all sorts of things. Kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. But before we get too deep into the work, I do want to provide some background context that will inform not only my process, but the work itself. So if you don't know, I am originally from California, and although I don't look like it, my family is actually Vietnamese American. My mother was born in Vietnam, and my dad is Dutch, and those paternal genes really kicked in, and I look exactly like my dad, but with a fuller figure. For the most part, I was raised by a single mother who worked as a hairstylist in a small town, so imagine Gilmore Girls, but much less charming and affluent. Actually, Healdsburg is like a fraction smaller than Kenosha. It's like 10,000 people. Kenosha's like 80,000 people, something like that. I looked it up. But I spent many of my summers with my grandmother in Long Beach. I come from a strong matriarchal family, and growing up, spending that time with my mom and my grandmother really influenced my art. My grandmother ran nail salons, and my mom was a hairdresser, so being in these spaces of beautification and witnessing this really tender intimacy and comfort between feminine bodies was a huge influence. So that's me and my grandmother's nail salon. And then here is like me at 5 years old holding Pomeranian puppies with like a full set of nails. But amidst the chorus of nail drills, blow dryers, and chatter, I would listen intently and watch these women perform transformative magic. There was a sense of safety in these spaces and a closeness between stylist and client. And I think part of my love for printmaking with all its hazardous chemicals actually comes from like an early exposure to like acetone or hair developer. I attended community college and transferred to Sonoma State University. Go Sea Wolves. Sonoma State actually reminds me a lot of Parkside because it is a commuter school and it's very close-knit, small community. I'm sorry, I'm so sniffly. I initially went there to study painting because I was like, I'm a painter, and I made silly, kind of impersonal, stupid stuff like this, and I was really trying to find my voice. Like, I was making work, but I didn't know what I was making it about. I just wanted to make silly stuff, but they're kind of impersonal, and it wasn't until I had a professor who actually pointed out, he's like, oh, you paint like you're trying to draw, and you actually draw a lot better than you paint, so maybe you should be a printmaker. I was like, okay, shady, but all right. And it wasn't like a hurtful comment, but it was something that redirected my attention to focus on printmaking rather than painting. And it was something that I immediately fell in love with. I became immersed in it. I fell into like a love-hate relationship with lithography, which, as you'll see, is what most of my print work is based in. And I loved the community aspect of printmaking because I was sharing space with others and making work. And as you'll see, the nails became a common motif in my work, reconciling these ideas of beauty and femininity and excess. And if you don't know what lithography is, it's actually a planographic print medium, typically executed on Bavarian limestone that is grained down and then drawn upon. There's also aluminum plate litho and photolitho, but It's a labor-intensive medium that can be so frustrating, but also so rewarding. This is just a brief, how I draw on the stone, and as you'll notice, my hand is on a piece of paper to cover the surface because it's grease sensitive, so anything that you touch will affect the stone, so I'm drawing with a grease crayon. But the printing process is very physical, and it involves repeatedly inking up the stone in layers while keeping the surface wet. And there's something about the rhythmic, the rhythmic and methodical nature of the process that is so incredibly meditative to me. And it feels really empowering to create something out of nothing and use this giant press. It's almost like you're a wizard and you're performing magic. It's very alchemic. It's super cool. But when I was in college, if you'll take art history classes, you'll see a bunch of work, but I was introduced to the work of Cindy Sherman, and it was just one of those experiences where I saw someone's work and I was just gobsmacked, and I felt an instant connection. Her ability to inhabit and document different characters and identities transformed the way that I produced my own work. So like Cindy Sherman, I use myself as the reference figure in most of my work. It's also cheaper than hiring models, and part of, especially being funny or making jokes is I never want the joke to be on someone else. I always want the joke to be on me and relate it to my own experience. But this is kind of how I started getting into performance-based art forms. I actually made this GIMP mask with materials from Joann Fabrics, and if you ever go to Joann's and you buy fabric, they always ask you, what are you making? And I had to be I'm making a GIMP mask. And so that was really funny. The other thing is, as I was making it, of course, I couldn't make it and then put it on my head and see how it looked like. So I asked my mom, I was I'm gonna put this on your head, really quick. But the GIMP mask wasn't really a sexual thing. It was more just a way to conceal my identity while also personifying a sense of vice in the most banal way, eating Taco Bell. And vice would continue to be an orbiting theme in my work as a way to address beauty in a parallel way, but also secretly coveting it. Food is also a recurring theme in my work as it relates to consumer culture and my own feelings about my body, advertising, and perceptions of femininity. Being from a Vietnamese American family, I'm painfully aware of my own body and how American I am. Food is often a way that you show love, and so you'll be pressured to eat because they love you so much, but then also criticize your body shape and offer you unsolicited diet advice. And as someone who grew up in the early 2000s where the body positivity movement hadn't quite hit yet and feminine bodies were under constant scrutiny, I often felt like my body took up too much space or that I didn't live up to an ideal or was performing properly. But towards the end of my undergraduate studies, I created a character known as Spicy Girl, meant to be a tacky but earnest display of pure American femininity and consumer culture. I had my friends hurl food and insults at me as I danced on stage and created prints from that. There was a sense of repulsion and attraction that would be a common theme in my work, that I wanted to capture that sense of multiplicity of wanting to be desired, but also repulsed by attention. And in 2018, when I graduated from SSU and moved in with some of my cool printmaker friends, I didn't stop making art, but I shifted to what I could make without a print shop. So it was mostly sculptures and drawings. I worked odd jobs, I started teaching part-time, and I began to reinvest in myself because I had spent so much time in the studio with tunnel vision that I kind of isolated myself from my friends and family. So this time outside of school was really important for me to reinvest myself and take care of what was important to me. I also started doing roller derby, so that was kind of a replacement for my love of printmaking because it was something physical and intense. I didn't score any points. I just look really cool in that photo, so I just wanted to show. My derby name was Cheese Whiz. Sometime around 2019, I watched that documentary, Beauty is Embarrassing, which profiles Chattanooga artist Wayne White. He's most known for his text paintings on recycled canvases, and he also previously worked on Pee-wee's Playhouse. And as I was watching it, one of my roommates remarked, he's like, "Oh, Wayne White, he aged like fine wine. Ooh." And then Wayne White's wife, Mimi Pond, who is also an artist, she's a cartoonist, she came on screen, and my roommate was like, "Ugh, she aged like milk." And it was kind of a gut punch. Despite these two people being successful artists, there was worth placed on them based on their physical appearance. So adding to that sexist rhetoric that women are consumable objects with an expiration date. And it reminded me of every time that I couldn't squeeze my body into a ballroom dancing dress, or when someone tried to validate me by saying, "You have a great personality." It's like, ooh. In the fall of 2020, I moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, and attended, there's Wayne White and Mimi Pond. He also did some sculptures that are really cool. But in 2020, as we all know, that was a rough year for everyone. I said, fuck it, let's go to grad school. And I moved to Knoxville, Tennessee. And despite the circumstances, I was met with a new community that provided immense community and support. And it was truly a great time. But as I began to make work in Tennessee, that offhand comment was just ringing in my ears, and I became obsessed with using milk as a symbol. And it felt like a string that I was pulling, like when you're pulling a string on a sweater, like the Weezer song, it starts to unravel or it just keeps going. But in my work, I was exploring impermanence and idealism when it comes to beauty, purity, and femininity. I returned to lithography as my preferred medium and used a friend to model, because I don't have that nice of hands. And I really wanted to highlight the status of the object, as well as taking inspiration from those Patrick Nagel salon window decals that you've seen, And this is going to be controversial. I know that we're in the dairy state, but did you know that California actually makes more dairy than Wisconsin? Sorry about it. Where I'm from in Northern California, there's a company called Clover Milk, and I grew up seeing these billboards along the 101 with Chloe the cow, and there was always some pun. I love Chloe. She's hilarious, and she's so scary. Like, she has this really intense smile and face that is, I love her. This billboard in particular will make sense later on, but my practice often refers to art history, such as this piece, which is loosely inspired by Vermeer's painting of the milkmaid. And I wanted to create a composition that was combining Dutch Golden Age indulgence with modern luxury. And instead of being the server or the caretaker of the milk, the figure is almost indignantly enjoying her meal. Also, that's not a misspelling. It's purposely spelled Crasher Barnel because I sent that piece to a show, and then when I got it back, they said, "Hey, you won an award." And then when I looked at the award, they had misspelled it, and I was like, oh, well, now I'm changing the name of the piece. That's hilarious. This is actually one of the reference photos I took from my previous piece. And as you can see, when I'm in character, I tend to draw a lot of attention. This guy's just like looking at the back of my pink head and wondering what's going on. But my work uses humor as a way to invite the viewer in while simultaneously being vulnerable. Humor has the power to disarm and ease tension, and I often use myself as the butt of the joke. And it wasn't until recently that someone pointed out that I often joke on myself in order to comfort others. I guess I'm like a master of deflection. I've got that Cancer rising in my big three. And also in Sue Morrison's book, where she profiles Richard Pachinko, who is like a famous clown artist, clown through mask, she emphasizes the importance of how things need to be personal in order to be universal, and how those layers create entry points for the viewer. Since I had just moved to Tennessee and I was super broke, I made work with what I had at hand, which was moving boxes and paper. And so I made these giant papier-mâché milk cartons. They're bulky, clumsy, imperfect, and one person described them as something that would be made at summer camp. And since I never got to go to summer camp, I was always with my grandma, I kind of took this as a compliment. But one of the papier-mâché pieces I made was actually a wearable sculpture that became the main figure for my video piece, Milk Run. But yeah, I'll just show, don't tell. That's just a fraction of it, but if you want to see the whole thing, it's on my website. But as I became more interested in video art, I started creating these rotoscoped animations, and continuing to use the figure in my work, I was inspired by those indulgent, surreal commercials and just the insidious nature of advertisements, like Bliss personified. Like if you've ever seen an Herbal Essences commercial in the 90s, just like, totally lost in the sauce with that shampoo. But around this time is when the kiss mark really makes its way into my work. The kiss mark may seem tacky, but when you think about it, the kiss mark, in a way, it's a print. It's a moment of pressure and connection, a confident and loud mark indicating softness or intimacy. I started experimenting with different drawing materials, such as butter. Butter is related to milk, dairy, that whole thing. Or like the phrase, oh, she got a great body, but her face. And it's like, ooh, that's not nice. But like I said, lithography, you're using a grease substance to draw on it. So rather than using those grease crayons, I was using butter. So I would put the butter on my lips and I would give the stone little kissies. And through a series of chemical reactions, I was able to print that grease image. And there was something really cathartic about doing this act, putting the butter on my lips, kissing the stone, and imposing my physical affection on something cold and unfeeling that couldn't love me back. I took the previous prints and actually made them into a GIF as a way to breathe life into them. But as you're familiar, most of my work begins photographically. I had rediscovered an old photo and remembered how adamant I was that for Halloween I wanted to be a cowboy and not a cowgirl. You can chalk it up to like maybe a tomboy phase, but as I'm older, I'm realizing I need to unpack that sense of internalized misogyny, and that it wasn't that I didn't like the color pink or that I preferred boys' clothes. It was that I saw how women were treated and I rejected these ideas because I didn't want to be seen as weak, or I wanted respect. And I mean, now we would kind of refer to that as pick-me girl energy, but I didn't want to be like other girls. But now that I'm older, I realize I'm exactly like other girls, completely deserving of respect regardless, and that there is a spectrum to girlhood and performance. But this also opened up my interest in cowboy culture and how we idealize and perform gender, hence the title Reverse Cowgirl. By using found photos and screen printing additional elements, I wanted to convey the sense of multiplicity of gender identity and performance with the romanticized idea of the West. What I would call the sister cousin to this piece is actually the beginning of my Buck Wilde era. So Buck Wilde is a mythic character, a failed rodeo clown and a former dairy spokeswoman, and an endearing bimbo. If I had to describe Buck Wilde with a vision board, it would include Bob Fosse's Sweet Charity, Flavor of Love, Seasons 1 and 2, Anna Nicole Smith, and Hairspray, which coincidentally, I actually was the lead in my high school's production of Hairspray, so, I knew all those songs, Good Morning Baltimore, all the rest. But if you haven't listened to the podcast, Dolly Parton's America, I highly recommend it. The title is loosely based on a class of the same name that was actually taught at UT by Professor Lynn Sacco. Unfortunately, I came to Tennessee too late to take that class, which was such a bummer, but the podcast covers the wide scope of Dolly, her impact on culture, and what she means to people. Dolly is self-aware and always the first to make a joke about herself while also embodying grace and kindness. So a lot of Buck is inspired by Dolly, and one year Buck Wilde actually won a Dolly lookalike contest, and so then I ended up creating a mini documentary about that experience. This is just a brief clip. The actual video is like 3.5, 4 minutes long, but I interviewed people and asked them to give me their impression of what they thought of Buck Wilde, and this is like, we're just jumping right in the middle of the video.
The human equivalent of someone being shot out of a cannon. Oh.
What does Buck Wilde do?
I feel like she tells me something different every time I see her.
It's probably not important.
I'm not sure. She's bringing the West back. In a way that's less cowboy and more kick-ass cowgirl.
But as part of my artistic research, I actually spent a summer working at Dollywood in the gift shop. There was something about it where it was mythic. The longtime employees that I'd worked with all had stories about seeing her, and I was surrounded by Dollywood merch. Guests would ask me every day, was Dolly here? Did you see her? Have you met her? Like, all of this stuff. There was a power in Dolly's presence, and this experience would go on to inspire my thesis work, and I wanted to continue to create a character of mythic proportion. So the first time I went out as Buck Wilde was actually at this country bar called Cotton Eye Joe's. So I donned the wig, the short dress, the pink cowboy boots, and the hat, and I garnered a lot of attention. One girl even tried to pay me to do a loyalty test on her boyfriend. I was tempted by the $20, but I was like, no, I give it back to her. I was like, as much as I want to be a girl's girl, I was like, this is, no. But this started the adventures of Buck Wilde. So for me, Buck Wilde was a way to perform a hyper-femme identity and explore an indulgent sense of beauty that I had secretly coveted. Buck Wilde's story is relatable in that it exemplifies ordinary beauty and idealism with hints of tragedy, as she's not immune to the indignities of life. By combining this personification of bimbo aesthetic and my own personal experiences, I want to create like a sort of American folklore around this character, similar to like a Johnny Appleseed or what have you. Buck Wilde is very much like that anti-hero, the main character that everyone thinks we are, attempting to live this life of a fun-loving gal with all the baggage that comes with presenting femme. And so there's this print that's actually a digital print with screen print that tells that story of Buck Wilde, and then there's a moving praxinoscope. And if you didn't clock it already, that piece is actually a reference to Edward Muybridge's Animal Locomotion, which is like one of the early representations of animation. So if you notice the horse, and then if you go back, it's like, oh, Buck Wilde is riding the bull at the bar. Good time. I held on for a good amount of time, I put the work in. But also, just to clarify, that's not a zoetrope. It's technically a praxinoscope, not to get too technical. A zoetrope is actually like a spinning cylinder with slots in it, and you look through it, and then the animation appears. A praxinoscope is actually similar in that it has that cylinder, but it also contains an additional cylinder with 12 sides with a mirror, and then it reflects the image that's on the inside of the cylinder. So that's just like a nerdy little thing. I made that out of MDF, a feed bowl that I had bedazzled, and there's actually a record player that I took apart and put in there, so just revealing all my secrets. But yeah. So the Edward Muybridge inspired piece, I also took that same set of like 12 frames and images and screen printed them, CMYK, and turned them into a GIF. Oh my God, who is calling me? You need to stop. Sorry, guys. But yeah, so I like making animated GIFs from prints. I think that combination of print with time-based is really cool. And in February of 2022, I had my second solo show at Gallery 1010, where I actually had two other performers dress as Buck Wilde during the opening. So the simultaneity of the characters inhabiting the same space called into question the authenticity of Buck Wilde as she's coexisting and mingling with people. It's kind of like, who's the real Slim Shady? But the show was a collection of works, including print, sculpture, and video, but, excuse me. Oh my God, I'm so burpy today. But it featured, the main attraction was these peep show boxes that were shaped like milk cartons that displayed animations when peered into them. I was actually able to make this body of work from help with the Terry Burnett Memorial Scholarship and the Dorothy Dill Materials Award. But that also meant I had to learn how to work with wood and craft these, so that was like a new skill I was learning. But the boxes created a certain expectation when peered into them because you're going up to it and you're thinking, ooh, what am I going to see? So there's a sort of voyeuristic intimacy when you're viewing them, but surprise, there's nothing lewd or crazy in there. It's just me taking my nails off. So there's one of the boxes and then the interior view, and then here's a view of the animation that would be inside of it. I wanted to convey this sense of rawness and almost like a de-dragging of beauty and the attraction and disgust that goes into something like taking off your nails. And as someone who is like a chronic nail biter, this is also like a personification of like that specific anxiety for me and oral fixation. But for me, the show was a great lesson in putting together different pieces of media and experimenting with this performed identity and creating myth, because then people were like, who was that? And I wasn't present at the show because Buck Wilde was there, but I heard it was a good time. But as I mentioned before, part of Buck Wilde's character is that she is a rodeo clown, and one of her stories being that she actually holds the record for slowest barrel ride in Wyoming. But in order to make these stories, I also had to make some sense of proof for these myths. So I had to actually get Buck on a horse to get her some experience. Unfortunately, I'm really afraid of horses. They're too big. They have like these huge teeth, and they could just like get spooked and then kick you, and then you're done. Like, I'm good. But I found a ranch that would teach me horseback riding, and unfortunately the horse was actually scared of the wig I was wearing, so it took a bit of convincing. I would have to like take the wig off and then like rub the horse with the wig to like be like, shh, like calm him down. And then we were making like really intense eye contact. So like horse girls, like I get it, you know what I mean? It's just like a big dog. It's fun. They stink and like, it's cool. I get it now. But going back to this previous photo, I like to show how photos are taken because it's hard being someone who is simultaneously like in front of the camera and then behind the camera and having to compose all these shots. So if you have really good friends who are willing to help you, they will do stuff like this, like lay on the ground and get that downward, upward shot angle. So shout out to Sarah Bernstein. She's awesome for helping me with that. But this is actually one of the more direct side-by-side comparisons of Buck Wilde and myself. One is me just in my regular clothes feeling much more comfortable in my body, and the other is Buck Wilde in full rodeo gear. But one of Buck Wilde's character traits or her lore is that she's a failed rodeo clown, so in order to provide concrete proof, I had to take Buck to her first rodeo. And in life, I try to make it a point to not lie, but it turns out if you lie and you're confident, you can kind of get in anywhere you want. And this was actually a lesson that I learned from my mom, because growing up, we would go to the county fair, and instead of like paying whatever for parking, she would go around the back where the racetrack was, and she would pull up to the gate, and she would tell the guy at the front, like, oh yeah, I'm dating one of the jockeys, and he would just let us in. And it worked for years. We got in for free like so many times. It was great. So my mom is also a big inspiration for the work, and I'm not talking about it in this talk, but I thought it's worth mentioning. People have pointed out, like, oh, are there any similarities between Buck Wilde and your mom? And I'm like, no. And then I'm like, ooh, probably. There's probably something there that I need to scratch at. But anyways, I fully learned the power of lying. I went up to the front at this rodeo, and I was in full rodeo gear. I actually had my camera with me, so I looked like super legit and professional. And I went up and I was like, I'm the volunteer rodeo clown. Where am I supposed to go? And the lady was just like, what? And I'm like, yeah, like they told me to come and find where the back was and blah, blah, blah. And she was like, oh, okay, like go around this way. And I was like, cool. So I saved $20. Yeah. So I was a volunteer rodeo clown, and sitting in the stands, I wasn't like unwelcome. It was jarring because people were like, who is this? Like so like weirdo. But people seemed to enjoy my company. But I didn't realize like how brutal rodeos were. And I sat in the stands and I would watch like a young man get bucked from a bull, and then he would just be lying on the ground like lifeless. And then there would just be a hush over the crowd. And the announcer would say, put your healing hands together for this young man. And it was just very intense. And of course, me being me, I turned to the people next to me and I'm like, does he need a Band-Aid? And they seemed to laugh, or maybe they were just laughing at me because I looked stupid. But, I was having a good time. And also, someone actually asked me to hold their baby, which I thought was really funny, that they trusted me enough to like hold their child. But yeah, this was a great experience in not only performing and being embodied in this character and having this sense of anonymity behind all of that clown makeup, but also, I was getting all these photos and people were asking me, they're like, oh, where are these photos? And I'm like, oh, like check the Facebook. And then I felt a little bad because I was like, I don't know, but as I was collecting these images, I started working with them to create a zine. This one was known as My Friend Buck. And this was more of a personal piece. I didn't really show this in my thesis, but it was just more of like a reflection on like what Buck Wilde means to me and the dynamic between us. But if I could wax a little philosophical here and get a little into print theory, I'm going to cite Joanna Drucker's The Work event. That is part of an article from a print theory book that you have to read in grad school, and it was just blah, so not fun. But Joanna Drucker talks about Sandow Burke's piece, where he is recreating these representations of Dante's Inferno. So he's kind of got one foot in the contemporary, one foot in the past, but then also referencing the Blair Witch Project. So if you're not familiar with the 1999 horror movie, it did a great job in this idea of like a transmedia approach to art and how we distribute information. So it's not to say it's successfully tricking viewers into thinking it's authentic, but having all of these different points of connection that aren't just a straight art piece in itself are ways to engage the viewer and to create myth and believability. And so the idea of having different artifacts gives authority to a persona and establishes a credible history. So this leads to my thesis exhibition, The Buck Wilde Attraction, which was like a quasi-museum / gift shop, having worked at Dollywood in the gift shop. Buck Wilde was the star, and I was the curator. So actually, if you look closely, you can see me running away from the inflatable sculpture, because in order to take that photo, the legs would just go up, but to get the legs in the frame, I had to hold them and then like run away really quickly. So that's the opening of the Buck Wilde. Also, we couldn't even have the sculpture on during the reception because it was so damn loud. It was just like, so sorry. But this is one of my favorite sculptures. This one's called Bent Over a Barrel because I have such a love for like slapstick comedy and physical humor and, you know, those wacky inflatable arm guys. So I made this kinetic sculpture, inflatable sculpture, whatever you want to call it. Kind of this, playing on this trope of helpless, disembodied women stuck in things. And I do love seeing something like this outside of a gallery setting. So this I just filmed behind my house. But yeah. I wanted the show to have a sense of authenticity so that strangers could come in, see everything, and be convinced of Buck Wilde's existence and her adventures. There were photos, objects, and placards that told her story, one of which was that Buck Wilde was a dairy spokeswoman. So I had to create a made-up milk company that Buck Wilde could be the poster child for, known as Lover's Milk. So remember Clover Milk, Clover, without the C is lover. So, of course, I made a punny banner / billboard inspired by Clover Milk. And if you clock that, it features that, does anyone know what the background image is from? Everyone knows. Yeah. You got it. Yeah, that ubiquitous Windows XP that like everyone knows, but you can't quite put your finger on it. So that photo is actually taken in Sonoma County, where I'm from, and it's so funny because it's, you know, this beautiful rolling green field, but that's not what it looks like today. So, you know, more advertising, more, you know, all of that idealism. But in doing this, I had to design these milk cartons, and of course, since it's Buck Wilde, how does the story go? Something has to go wrong. So there is a newspaper clipping from when she was stripped of her dairy title after it was revealed on a hot mic that she was actually lactose intolerant. As pictured by, it's difficult to see, but with the newspaper article, you can see her feet peering out from underneath the bathroom stall, so you can imagine what happened on that hot mic. But continuing to wax poetic about printmaking and the importance of print and its prevalence. What is a print? When something is transferred from a matrix to another substrate, by that logic, a makeup wipe counts as a print. So the result almost kind of feels like a relic in that immediacy and intimacy of contact, a record of a face from a different day. At the end, visitors could grab an air freshener from the wall, a bumper sticker, or a postcard. I'm the kind of person who loves to collect postcards that I will never send, so I just like hoard them. But the air fresheners, because I love to talk about how things are made, so those were actually screen printed pieces of pink mat board that I then laser cut and then strung and sprayed with like a body spray that I got for Christmas that I was like, ooh, this is not my scent, but this is Buck Wilde's scent. So yeah, I like to do things where people can take something away from that experience. But after graduating, I went to Poland for a few weeks on a residency, and of course, Buck Wilde came along too. So imagine a rodeo clown in Wrocław, Poland, just hanging out in a suburb. But while there, my friend Haley Takahashi and I had a show there. There's a fella looking at my print, very nice. While we were there, we also made some risographs. So if you don't know, risographs are kind of like a cross between like digital printmaking and screen print. It's super cool, very exciting. So so Haley is my friend on the left, and then in the middle is Professor Mariusz. I can't pronounce his last name, unfortunately, but he was a very nice and welcoming guy, and he kept singing that song by Eve, the one that goes, "Who's that girl? La 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 la." Like, he just kept singing it, and I was like, all right, like, cool. So that was really fun. But when I came back to the States, I was dealing with a lot of personal and emotional change. My cat was slowly dying, and I was trying to figure out the next steps in my life. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. But during that time, my sketchbook acted as like a visual journal, and I like to look back on these rawness of these moments and those documented emotions and recognize these patterns and phases, because even when things are so crazy and you're just like, oh, your brain is just spinning, it's nice to have a record of these things that you can refer to and kind of make sense of later on. And I don't know if anyone else is like this, but does anyone else, like, when you're kind of waking up and kind of sleeping, you have these lucid ideas of like everything makes sense when you're half asleep and you're like, oh my God, I have the best idea. And so I had this idea that like, if I could only show someone how to draw a perfect circle, then I would be like the best teacher ever. I would be like, oh my God, like, it's so easy. Like, I know how to like tell people how to, like, I found the answer. So I figured I could make, that, and also I think I just finished watching True Detective season 1 for the like 7th time, so I was like, all that Nietzschean philosophy of like time is a flat circle was just like stuck in my head. So I made this zine, which was another risograph on how to draw a perfect circle, and it starts out basic, like gather your materials, apply pressure to the paper, and then it goes into the spiral of emotions of remember that things are impermanent, ever changing, and blah, 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 blah. But the moral of the story is that, you know, things change, things are cyclical, and that you are loved. And then you're done. But this was actually the last print that I made in Tennessee. So like I mentioned, I was using butter as a drawing material on litho, because remember, it's grease sensitive. And so instead of doing a kiss mark, I was like, I'm gonna put this butter on my butt. And so similar to like photocopying your butt, I just put butter on my butt and then sat on the stone and printed it. And I thought it was funny. It was like impulsive and like, oh, I'm gonna do this. Great, I'm so glad I did it. But during my time here at Parkside, I don't know, you might see some familiar faces. I've been working with students in screen printing, and I actually helped quite a few of them in Carrie Waters' Make It, Market It, Sell It course. I always forget the proper name for it, so I think that's it. What is it? Think it, make it, market it. Thank you. It's the think part. I don't think. So I just get straight to the making, which is kind of evident in my work. It's very like impulsive. But anyways, you'll see there's Romo with his shirt, and then there's Catherine printing in like one of my favorite colors, pink. So super cool. So if you're not familiar with screen printing, it's like a stencil-based art medium. So pretty cool. So here we finally arrive to horseplay. Sorry that took so long to get here, but I like to provide a lot of context because I feel like my work has so much lore to it. And I'm just like, I want to be understood, so I have to tell you everything. But if you haven't already seen it, the show centers around Buck Wilde's failed sideshow, and the main attraction being a pantomime horse. Pause for laughter. Horseplay combines my love for slapstick comedy, dreamy surrealism, and soft material. And if you're not familiar, a pantomime horse is a 2-person performance. One is in the front, the other behind, which lends itself to a lot of physical gags due to the uncanny nature. And it's kind of become like a trope in media where people are out of sync, and so the horse becomes kind of dismembered, and it's like a big jokey thing. But with the pantomime horse, I wanted to emphasize the fragmented nature of performance, since it's reliant on 2 people performing in synchronicity. So for Buck Wilde, the head of the horse vanished, so she couldn't perform it, leaving her their rear end. So rather than creating a typical print edition, these cyanotypes exist as one-offs and have been transformed into wall hangings, because the idea is that rather than a traditional print, which is on paper, these are on fabric and can be hung on a wall and can be folded and whatever and, moved for a sideshow. And since part of my process is deflection, I never want the viewer to be looking directly at something. There always needs to be some sort of translation or transformation. So rather than just showing the photos, these cyanotypes create a diffusion of the imagery, but also bring some surprise in the developing process. And ideas don't exist in a vacuum. They're often plucked from memory or come to attention in a cyclical fashion. Remember, we're talking about circles. When we're ready, and we're ready to realize them. Also, I am reading Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic, so that's very like, ooh, living beyond fear creatively or whatever. But one of my favorite pieces of all time is actually Joseph Boy's performance, I Like America and America Likes Me from 1974, where he stayed in a room with a coyote wrapped in felt and with a cane as his only protection. And I was kind of joking last summer when I was visiting a friend. I was like, oh, I could like recreate this with like a blanket and like a cat toy and like play with your cat and it'd be really funny. And then I just was like, thinking about that, making sketches. And I just really love the way that the figure is like obfuscated by the felt, and there's the heaviness with the folds, and it kind of held a spark to create a freestanding figural sculpture of like a half of a horse. So the horse in question, truly defying gravity and a testament to my engineering skills. Please don't touch the horse. It's very delicate and it's like very precarious. But all of the work in this exhibition is new, with the exception of these silicone horseshoes. I had made them in grad school, but I could never really figure out how to fit it into an exhibition or frame it and make it cohesive with my work. And it wasn't until this idea of like a sideshow, which is interactive with the pantomime horse and all of this other stuff, and it's meant to be like a spark of joy, came along. And then also like the literal use of horseshoes and the rest of the imagery, it came together. They're also like really fun. So they're these silicone horseshoes. So they make like a really cool smack when you throw them. So there's 3 of them in there. You're more than welcome to, if you're in there, you can just go ahead and throw them. Oh my God. But the show features repeated horse-related imagery to tell a narrative. For example, the different iterations of the horseshoes transformed in material and scale, which invite viewers to engage with. You can touch these, but please be very gentle. They're like these like soft, almost like door knockers. But I love the way that these pieces interact with one another. There's a push and pull of material and expectations that's kind of surreal. That is something that I love. The cyanotypes combine my love for printmaking with soft sculpture in an attempt to convey this narrative of Buck Wilde's life. And so it's a collection of photographs translated into cyanotype. And I love that rich blue color. So kind of stepping away from the pink, cyanotype is just really beautiful. And of course, I made these postcards, which with lithography, because I love litho, again with butter kisses, and they don these very tender phrases, but also have nothing written on them. And this is a video, which is a mix of found test footage. It's kind of done in the style of like those snarky Adult Swim bumps of like with the black and white with the text. But it's very inspired by like lost film footage. So you could see it in the gallery, but I'll just play it. So it's only a minute. I hope you can read that. It's kind of small, I apologize. This show is different from my previous work in that Buck Wilde isn't necessarily the main focus, but more so a tertiary character in this misfortune. The imagery focuses on the pantomime horse, which also adds an extra layer of covering of Buck Wilde. What I love about Buck Wilde is that she allows me to fail, to not be too hard on myself while also revealing desires or holding space for profound sadness or grief. The show is emblematic of how, despite dashed dreams or unmet expectations, I feel truly lucky to be in the position that I'm in and that life is worth living. So nothing is ever as expected, and I hope you enjoyed this show and this talk, so thank you.